I'm Elizabeth at A Literary Princess. If you are new here, welcome. I'm a 6-year PhD candidate in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists. And as you might expect, I love to read. So as you can see behind me, my Oxford shelf looks like it has been ransacked. And that is because of what we are talking about today. This has happened once before when I did my video on all of the Victorian literature I have read. And today we are talking about the Regency literature I have read, because we are coming to the close of Feb Regency. So Feb Regency is an event hosted by Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space, Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia, Tristan from Tristan and the Classics, and Stephanie from Miss Richards Reads. And it is all about reading Regency literature. And the definition of Regency is from 1795 to 1837, the beginning of the Victorian period, in the UK. So England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Definition of the Regency can get a little loosey-goosey. Technically, it only lasted from, I don't know, like 1811 to 1814, because it was named for the time when the Prince of Wales was acting as regent for King George, who was unable to rule. But we extend it to kind of the entire time of romantic literature. And we can even kind of push it into the 1780s, 1770s if we really want to. So I am going to be talking about the literature that I have read from relatively that time period. Now, obviously, I am a Victorianist, so after the Regency period. However, I still like a lot of Regency literature, and my master's degree is actually in both Romantic and Victorian literature. So while I have not read as much Regency literature as Victorian, I've read a pretty good amount. So let's jump in. So we are going to be going through these authors in alphabetical order, and I'm going to talk about books that I've read by them and books that I want to read by them. Some of them I haven't read any books by, so then I will be talking just about the books I want to read. And we're actually starting off with an anonymous work, and that is The Woman of Color. This came out in, are we gonna say the date on the back? No, we're not, because that would be useful to me. I think I do that every time with this book too. This was published in 1808 and is about a mixed-race heiress from the West Indies coming over to England. I actually had this on my Feb Regency TBR, however, I did not get to it, so I will probably be reading it in Jane Austen July. Now, an author who I think we've all read from if we're into Regency literature, and that is, of course, Jane Austen. I have read all of Jane Austen's main novels, so going in publication order: Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Emma. Was Emma or Mansfield first? Mansfield was first. Then Emma. Persuasion, and finally Northanger Abbey. In addition to all of her complete novels, I've also read her novella Lady Susan, her 2 unfinished novels, The Watsons and Sanditon, and also a fair amount of her juvenilia, including Volume the Second, which includes Love and Friendship, probably the most famous of her early works. And then also from a different collection of her juvenilia, The Beautiful Cassandra. So there's not much by Jane Austen that's left for me to read. I would like to read more of her letters and finish off what's left of the juvenilia, just because I'm a completionist. But yeah, I've read a lot of Jane Austen. I think probably if you're watching this video, you've read at least a few of hers as well. Next up, we get to Frances Burney, who was a big influence on Jane Austen. I have read 2 of her novels. The first is Evelina, which is actually from 1778 and is technically not Regency, but because she is a Regency author, we kind of let that go. I have also read Cecilia, which is from 1782. Again, not technically Regency, but we're just going to say that it is. I've also read pieces from her journals and letters, and I do want to actually finish reading this all the way through. I just read pieces for my exams. But yeah, I pretty much read all the parts where she was writing a novel or right after she had written a novel. I do want to read the last two works by Burney that are left. The first of which is Camilla, published in 1796. Thank you for having it on the back, Oxford. So this is actually Regency. I will be reading this in December as part of my 18th century novel project. I'm very excited for it because I loved Cecilia and Evelina. And then her final novel from 1814 is The Wanderer, or Female Difficulties. Just realized that I forgot William Blake. I am so sorry, William Blake. He is one of the Romantic poets. I have read a selection of his poems, not the entirety, definitely. His big collections are the Songs of Innocence and Experience, which were published together in 1794, but I believe Songs of Innocence was published first in 1789. And I think that's where all of the poems that I've read by him are from those two. Blake's fine. I'm not a huge fan of poetry from this period, so I don't really feel the need to read any more of his stuff than I've already read. More poetry with George Gordon, Lord Byron. Again, I've read selected poems from him, notably She Walks in Beauty and Darkness, both of which I have taught. Again, I don't really feel the need to read anymore by him. I do have a great time though when I teach him, just like kind of hating on him. My students seem to like that, so, because he was kind of a piece of work. Oh my goodness, more poetry. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, again, selected poems, most notably The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, of course. But my favorite by him is actually Christabel, which I will forever be upset was not finished. Again, I don't really feel the need to read anymore. I will happily reread The Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Christabel. And if Christabel magically was finished and they found that, I would read it, but I don't think that's going to be happening. And now one that I just read for this Feb Regency, Charlotte Dacre's Zofloya, or The Moor, published in 1806. I didn't know what to do with this. This was very strange. It's a Gothic novel. I don't know what to make of it. I will talk about it more in my February wrap up. I'm glad that I read it, but I'm not going to be reading any more by Dacre, I don't think. Next up is Thomas de Quincey. I have read his Confessions of an English Opium Eater from 1821. Honestly, I need to reread it. I don't remember much of it. I read it for my exams a few years ago, and it's just kind of was. I would also like to read the and other writings in here, which include On the Knocking at the Gate in Macbeth, Suspiria de Profundis, and The English Mail Coach. I know nothing about any of those, although the Macbeth one sounds interesting. And I have it, so might as well read it. Next up is Maria Edgeworth. I have read Belinda, which was published in 1801. Edgeworth was another big influence on Jane Austen. I loved Belinda. Speaking of wild, there is some wild stuff that goes on in here, but it is fantastic. And I want to read Castle Rackrent, which was published in 1800. I would actually want to read pretty much anything else by Edgeworth. I just happen to have this one, and it's readily available and very short, so that's where I'll be starting. Next up is Susan Ferrier and her novel Marriage from 1818. I loved this. I thought this was fantastic. Again, great if you're a fan of Jane Austen or Maria Edgeworth or Frances Burney. And it's dealing with how people were prejudiced against the Scottish at the time, as well as, you know, the typical marriage plot that you find in Jane Austen. This was great. I loved it. I don't really know anything else about Ferrier's other works, and I didn't feel like looking them up. But I do want to read more by her if I can find it. Another one who I've never read by is Mary Hayes, and I want to read her Memoirs of Emma Courtney from 1796. This is a book that is dealing with kind of the position of women at the time. Obviously, I think you can kind of tell that's one of my main interests in this period based on the books that I've read and enjoyed. So I don't even know how I came across this, but it's on my TBR and I would love to get my hands on a copy. Next up is James Hogg. I have read his The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner from 1824. Again, this was wild. I need to reread this because I read it for my master's degree, which was quite a while ago now, and it was a trip. A trip. Again, it was another one I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. So I do want to revisit it and see what I think of it now. Another author I have not read anything from, Elizabeth Inchbald. This is A Simple Story from 1791. I will be reading this in, I believe, October for my 18th century novel project. A friend of mine is writing a dissertation chapter on this, or has written a dissertation chapter. Her dissertation's done, unlike mine. And again, it sounded kind of wild, and I want to read it. Now, this is an author who I have read from before, but the work I read from her is actually Victorian. This is Anna Jameson. So I read her Sisters of Charity at Home and Abroad, or something to that effect, which was published in the 1830s or 40s, I don't remember which, but it was Victorian. The Regency work I want to read by her is probably her most famous one, and this is The Diary of an Ennui, published in 1826. And it seems that this is actually based on her own life, so I'm not sure whether it's a novel or a memoir, to be honest, but it deals with her being in Italy as the governess to a young pupil. So it sounded interesting, and I want to read more by her. More poetry. This is John Keats. Again, I've read selected poems by him, particularly his most famous Ode to a Nightingale and Ode on a Grecian Urn. But my favorite by him is his sonnet to Mrs. Reynolds's cat, which is just a delight, an absolute delight. I would say that him and Coleridge are my two favorites of the Romantic poets. Next up is Lady Caroline Lamb, who I have not read anything from yet, but who I've heard plenty about because she is very famous for her affair with Lord Byron. She wrote a novel in 1816 called Glenarvon, and it is just like a very thinly disguised, unflattering depiction of Byron. And I really want to read it because it just sounds fun, and the drama is so messy, and it just seems like a really good time. Another author I haven't read from, which is kind of surprising considering the kind of importance of his book, Matthew Lewis and his book The Monk from 1796. This is a major work of Gothic fiction, and yeah, I'm kind of surprised I haven't read it yet. I know at least one of my friends really hates on Lewis a lot, so I'm kind of curious to know what that's all about too. Next up is Sydney Owenson, Lady Morgan, who I've read two books from. The first is The Wild Irish Girl from 1806. This was really interesting. I had problems, a few problems with it, but I ultimately did like it. It is about an Englishman who goes to stay on his father's Irish estate, and he learns about the Irish people and it kind of is dispelling prejudices. So that was a good one. I've also read The Missionary from 1811. This is a historical piece set in India dealing with a Portuguese missionary, and I did not like this one at all. I also read this for my exams, and it was not my thing. I don't think I will be reading anything more from Owenson, but I'm glad that I have read 2 of her works. Another one who my friend is writing or has written a dissertation chapter on, and that has made me want to read this author and this novel. This is Amelia Opie and her novel Adeline Mowbray from 1804. It is kind of based on Mary Wollstonecraft and her relationship with William Godwin. And I don't know, it just seems like a really good one, and my friend made it sound so interesting that I want to read it. 2 authors who go together because they are sisters, Anna Maria Porter and Jane Porter. I read a biography of them last year, Sister Novelists by Devani Lucer, and adored it, and it made me want to read their works, obviously. So from Anna Maria, I'm interested in The Hungarian Brothers from 1807, which is set during the French Revolution, and is looking at the Habsburg Empire. So that seems like it could be interesting. It seems like this is kind of her most famous one, and the one that I might actually be able to find somewhere. And from Jane, I want to read her most famous one, The Scottish Chiefs from 1810, which is about William Wallace. I'm excited to check these 2 out because, again, I loved that biography of them. It was so well done. Next up, we have Anne Radcliffe. I have read The Mysteries of Udolpho from Are We Gonna Tell Me? Yes, 1794. Obviously a classic of the Gothic genre, and is being heavily parodied in Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey. I do need to reread this. This is another one my friend is writing a dissertation chapter on, but I had read that before she started that. But yeah, I do need to give this a reread. And then I also have The Italian, which I'm going to be reading in, I believe, November. And this is from 1797. I've heard really good things about this one. And a very recent acquisition is A Sicilian Romance from 1790, which is nice and short, unlike Mysteries of Udolpho. So yeah, I'm excited to get to more Radcliffe because, again, she is a staple of the Gothic genre. And Mysteries of Udolpho, though slow at places, I did enjoy. Next up, we have more poetry. This is Mary Robinson. Again, I've read selected pieces by her. The Haunted Beach, I think is the title, and then something about like London on a summer morning. But she also wrote novels and plays, so I would definitely be interested in checking those out, but I don't know really which ones to start with. And now for one of the Regency authors who was like the most popular at the time, and that is Sir Walter Scott. So I have read Waverley, which was published in 1814. It's his first novel. It was okay. I do want to read more from him though. Starting with Ivanhoe from 1819. I think this is his most famous one. It's a medieval romance set during the time of Richard the Lionheart. I meant to read it for my exams and I never did. So maybe I'll get to that sometime soon. I also want to read from him Kenilworth? Kenilworth? I don't think I'm pronouncing that correctly, from 1821. My friend was going to write a dissertation chapter on this and then ended up not. But it sounded like there was an interesting mother-daughter relationship in that I kind of wanted to check out. Another heavy hitter, Mary Shelley. I have read Frankenstein, of course. I have taught Frankenstein. Great book. I don't think anything more needs to be said about Frankenstein. I would like to read more by her, starting with Matilda. Now, Matilda is interesting because she wrote it in 1819, and it was not published until the 1980s or 90s because it deals with a father-daughter incest relationship. And so, yeah. I'm hopefully going to be reading this in September, actually, because of something that we'll talk about in a minute. So I'm just going to put this one down because we need it again. I've also read her short story, The Immortal, I think it's called, which was really interesting, especially in conjunction with Frankenstein. And of course, we have to have Percy Shelley. Again, I have read a selection of his poems, Mont Blanc, Ozymandias, probably a few more, definitely a few more, because I read a whole little collection of his poems during my exams. I picked this copy of Shelley's poetry and prose up for free, and I would like to read it, even though Shelley is not my favorite person in the world, or my favorite poet even. But I think it would be really interesting to read him, and because him and Mary Shelley really, like, worked together a lot. They read each other's stuff. They're sometimes working with the same themes. He proposed some edits to Frankenstein, so I would like to read more of his work and kind of see the interplay between the two. Another poet is Charlotte Smith, and I've read a selection of her sonnets, which I think were published in 1783, so again, technically not Regency, but it's fine, we'll call it Regency. I actually really like her sonnets. They're incredibly depressing, like so depressing. And I want to read one of her novels called Emmeline, which was published in 1788. Again, not really Regency, but kind of. It's fine. And again, dealing with position of woman and marriage and all of that, which I'm very interested in. We are almost at the end. We have 2 authors left, and the first of those is Mary Wollstonecraft, the mother of Mary Shelley. I have read A Vindication of the Rights of Women. I need to reread it. Again, I read this for my exams, and I did like it, but I need to reread it and go deeper. And then I also want to read some of her fiction, which I have in this bind up with Matilda by Mary Shelley. So first we have Mary, which was published in 1788. Technically not Regency, but it's fine. I'm actually going to be reading that in September for my 18th century novel project. And I think I have wrongly stated that I was reading Maria several times, but no, I'm reading Mary. Maria was published posthumously in 1798. Regency. But I am actually going to be reading all 3 of these in September because they are short and for Shorty September. And since I'm reading Mary, I might as well just read all 3 of them. So I'm excited to check out Wollstonecraft's fiction. Again, my friend's dissertation introduction is dealing with Mary Wollstonecraft and with one of these 2 novels. I don't remember which one. To be fair, the titles are variations of the exact same name, which is also the author's name. So I think the confusion is warranted. And then we are ending on a very heavy hitter. Of course, William Wordsworth. I have read a selection of his poems. I've just forgotten every single poem of his. But, you know, all the typical ones. Why am I not? I wandered lonely as a cloud. Jeez, that was way harder than it needed to be. And Tintern Abbey. I have also read one book of The Prelude. Now, this is interesting because my guy, like, revised this a bajillion times. So this has the texts from 4 different revisions: 1798, 1799, 1805, and 1850. Yeah, I read part of this for a class back in my master's degree, and I have it, so I'm like, I should read the whole thing. It's kind of confusing, though, with the way that this is set up with the different texts. And you, like, have one on each page, and it's just kind of confusing. And I don't really know what to do with it at all. I think I need to read the introduction and see, like, what the editor is thinking, because otherwise I'll just be lost. But I do want to read it, even though it is ginormous and poetry, and from an era where I'm not a huge fan of the poetry, generally speaking. But I think it'll be worth it. So those are the Regency writers and works I have read and want to read. Let me know down in the comments below, have you read any of these? What did you think of them? What are some of your favorite Regency works? Do you have any recommendations for me? If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.